The rain fell in sheets against the research station windows as Ethan Sullivan reviewed his data on orca migration patterns. At 34, he had established himself as one of the leading marine biologists in the field, with a reputation for being methodical, dedicated, and somewhat detached. His colleagues respected him, but few knew him well, a fact that rarely bothered him until quiet moments like this. The door to the lab swung open, bringing with it a gust of cold air and a woman Ethan had never seen before. She carried several camera bags, her dark hair dripping rainwater onto the floor. "Sorry to intrude," she said, pushing her rain-splattered glasses up her nose. "Dr. Patterson mentioned I could set up here. I'm Olivia Reed, the photographer for the Conservation Journal." Ethan nodded, remembering the email about a documentarian joining their project. Of course, there's space in the corner. "I'm Ethan Sullivan." Olivia arranged her equipment with practiced precision, her movements efficient but unhurried. Unlike many photographers who had visited the station, she didn't immediately start snapping pictures or asking questions. Instead, she observed, taking notes in a worn leather journal. "You've been studying the J-pod for how long?" she asked after several minutes of silence. 7 years, Ethan replied, surprised by her knowledge of the specific orca family. Most visitors asked basic questions. "I followed your paper on their communication patterns. Fascinating work." Over the next few days, Ethan found himself noticing Olivia's quiet presence around the station. She wasn't flashy like some of the journalists who cycled through, nor did she have the aggressive enthusiasm of the interns. Instead, she moved, with purpose, capturing images that revealed the soul of their work rather than just its surface. During a particularly stormy evening, when the rest of the team had retreated to their quarters, Ethan found Olivia on the observation deck, protected from the rain but gazing out at the turbulent sea. "Most people aren't out here in weather like this," he said. Offering her a steaming mug of tea, she accepted with a small smile. "I've always thought you see the truest nature of things during storms, everything stripped down to essentials." Something in her words resonated with him. His past relationships had always felt like calm seas, pleasant, but somehow lacking depth. Women who were attracted to his accomplishments rather than his essence. Conversations that skimmed the surface rather than diving deep. "What brought you to wildlife photography?" he asked, genuinely curious. "I spent most of my life observing rather than participating," she said after a thoughtful pause. "There's a certain power in witnessing without disturbing, and seeing patterns others miss because they're too busy making noise." As the rain drummed against the metal roof, they talked about the oceans, about conservation, about the delicate balance of ecosystems. But beneath those conversations lay something unspoken. A recognition of similar souls who had learned to navigate the world through careful observation rather than bold declarations. When they finally parted ways that night, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the quiet anticipation of wanting to continue a conversation that felt nowhere near finished. Unspoken connections, the summer research season stretched into autumn, painting the Pacific Northwest coastline in rich amber and crimson. As the tourist crowds thinned, Ethan and Olivia found themselves sharing more moments in comfortable silence. Their collaboration had evolved naturally, tracking the orca's behavioral patterns while she documented their findings through her remarkable photography. What began as professional respect had transformed into something neither could quite name. They took to exploring the rugged coastline during a few hours, hiking through ancient forests where massive trees filtered sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. In these spaces, away from colleagues and equipment, their conversations meandered like woodland streams, sometimes flowing swiftly through passionate discussions about conservation ethics, sometimes pooling quietly into reflective silences. "I've never met someone who can be quiet without making it awkward," Ethan admitted one evening as they watched the sunset from a cliff overlooking the ocean. The sky blazed with color, reflecting off the water's surface in a display that seemed too magnificent to be real. Olivia tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her expression thoughtful. "My father used to say that people who fill every silence don't trust what might emerge if they stop talking." "Wise man," she agreed, a momentary sadness crossing her features. "He taught me to photograph what isn't immediately visible." The moment before the obvious moment. As autumn deepened into winter, Ethan found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone about his childhood struggles with connection, about his disappointment in relationships that had seemed promising but ultimately felt hollow. Olivia listened with an attentiveness that made him feel truly seen. He assumed she'd had similar experiences. A beautiful, intelligent woman surely had navigated numerous relationships, though she rarely spoke of her past. Her insightful observations about human connections suggested wisdom gained through experience. When she occasionally referenced feeling like an outsider in social situations or mentioned past disappointments, he filled in the blanks with his own assumptions. Their colleagues noticed the bond forming between them. Dr. Patterson, the project director, remarked to Ethan one day, "You two speak the same language?" It's rare to find that kind of synchronicity. By the time winter storms forced the temporary closure of the research station, they had developed a rhythm that felt both professional and deeply personal. When Olivia received an assignment to photograph wildlife in the Olympic Peninsula, and Ethan was invited to give a series of lectures at the same location, it seemed like more than coincidence. They rented neighboring cabins near Lake Crescent, where old-growth forests met crystal waters. Their days were filled with separate work, but evenings became a sacred space where they gravitated toward each other like celestial bodies locked in orbit. The night Ethan first kissed her came after a day when they'd witnessed a family of otters playing along the lakeshore. The joyful abandon of the creatures had left them both laughing with unexpected delight. As they stood on the dock outside his cabin, the moon casting silver light across the water, he'd reached for her hand. "I don't want to assume anything," he said quietly, "but I think we're building something important here." Olivia's eyes held both warmth and uncertainty as she nodded. "Something real," she whispered. When their lips met, it felt like the natural conclusion to a conversation they'd been having for months without words. What Ethan didn't understand yet was that for Olivia, this moment represented not just another chapter in a familiar story, but the opening of a book she had kept closed her entire life. The revelation spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and the offer of permanent positions at a new marine conservation center being established on San Juan Island. After months of deepening connection, Ethan and Olivia decided to take the next step, not just professionally, but personally. They found a small cottage overlooking Friday Harbor, where orcas regularly passed on their migration routes. The locals held an unofficial tradition for new residents, a commitment to the community ceremony at the historic lighthouse. It wasn't legally binding like a marriage, but it symbolized becoming part of something larger than oneself. For two scientists dedicated to ecosystems and interconnection, it felt perfectly aligned with their values. The ceremony was simple. Vows exchanged at sunset, while a small gathering of new colleagues and friends witnessed. Olivia wore a dress the color of deep ocean water, adorned with a single strand of pearls. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her as they promised to honor each other's truths and support each other's growth. Later that night, in their cottage with windows open to the sound of waves against the shore, the air between them hummed with anticipation. Soft lamplight cast gentle shadows across the room as Ethan reached for Olivia, drawing her close. "I've never wanted anyone the way I want you," he murmured against her neck. Her body tensed slightly, almost imperceptibly. When he looked into her eyes, he saw something he hadn't expected, fear mingled with determination. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you before we go further." He sat beside her on the edge of the bed, concern replacing desire. "What is it?" Olivia took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Never been intimate with anyone before." The words came out rushed, as though she'd been holding them back for too long. Not because of religious reasons, or even moral ones, exactly. "It's more complicated than that," Ethan blinked, processing her words. Of all the things she might have said, this was perhaps the last he expected. At 32, with her quiet confidence and deep emotional intelligence, he had naturally assumed she'd had relationships similar to his own. "I've always felt things too deeply," she continued, not meeting his eyes. "Since I was young, I experienced the world with an intensity that others seemed to find overwhelming. In relationships, I couldn't do casual. couldn't separate physical connection from emotional investment. So when others wanted something lighter, I just stepped back. She finally looked up at him, vulnerability etched across her features. Over time, it became easier not to start than to explain why I needed more. My work took me to remote places, which made it simpler to avoid questions. I threw myself into photography, capturing intimacy in nature that I couldn't find in my own life. Ethan remained silent, sensing she wasn't finished. Then I met you, she said, her voice steadier now. And for the first time, I found someone who could sit in silence without needing to fill it, who could see beauty in the ordinary moments, who understood that real connection happens in the spaces between words. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I've been afraid to tell you because I didn't want you to see me differently, as somehow lacking or incomplete. But I've never been more certain about anything than I am about us. The weight of her confession hung between them, reshaping everything Ethan thought he knew about their relationship and challenging assumptions he hadn't realized he'd made. New understanding, Ethan's mind raced as he absorbed Olivia's revelation. All the moments between them now appeared in a different light, not diminished, but transformed. Her hesitations during their more passionate moments, the way she sometimes pulled back when they grew closer physically, only to connect more deeply in conversation afterward. The careful, observant way she approached every aspect of life. He realized that what he had interpreted as the wisdom of past experience was actually something else. Entirely a depth of feeling so profound that she had protected it fiercely, waiting for a connection worthy of its intensity. Are you disappointed? Olivia asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. Ethan took her hands in his, choosing his words carefully. Not disappointed, honored, and honestly, a little overwhelmed by what this means. What does it mean to you? The voice was small but steady. It means you've chosen me in a way no one ever has before. He moved closer, brushing a tear from her cheek. It means you've been seeing the world through a lens of extraordinary perception all this time, storing up all this capacity for connection while waiting for something authentic. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly as he continued. I think I've spent most of my adult life assuming that experience equates to depth. That having multiple relationships somehow made me more prepared for something real. He shook his head, suddenly seeing his past with painful clarity. But maybe I've just been practicing the same shallow lessons over and over. Olivia's eyes widened. That's not what I meant. I don't think there's anything wrong with having those experiences, I know, he interrupted gently. But there's something profound about the path you've chosen. It wasn't about rules or restrictions. It was about waiting for a connection that matched the depth you naturally feel. Outside their window, the distant call of whales carried across the water. The distinctive vocalizations of the orcas they had studied together. It seemed fitting that these creatures, known for their complex social structures and lifelong bonds, would provide the soundtrack for this moment. I've been thinking about something you told me months ago, Ethan said. About photographing the moment before the obvious moment. I think that's how you've lived your whole life, seeing beneath the surface. Valuing what others miss in their rush to get to the expected conclusion. For the first time since her confession, Olivia smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. I've spent so long worrying about this conversation, rehearsing how to explain myself without sounding naive or damaged. You're neither of those things, Ethan said firmly. You're the most authentic person I've ever known. He moved to sit beside her against the headboard, pulling a blanket around them both. The urgency of passion had been replaced by something more profound, a recognition that what lay between them transcended physical expression, though it would eventually include that too. Tonight doesn't have to be about anything except this conversation, he said. We have time, all the time. I want to know you, Olivia. It's the real you that you've been protecting all these years. And I want you to know me, not just the scientist or the man you assumed had it all figured out. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the tension draining from her body. I was so afraid you would see me as a project or a responsibility. I see, he said, turning to meet her gaze. As someone who has taught me what it really means to choose someone deliberately. I'm choosing you, not despite your path, but because of it. As the night deepened around them, they talked until dawn about fears and hopes, about the difference between loneliness and solitude, about the courage it takes to remain true to oneself in a world that rewards conformity. By the time the first light of morning painted the horizon in gentle gold, something fundamental had shifted between them, a foundation laid for a connection neither had thought possible. Beyond expectation, summer returned to the island, bringing with it warm breezes and the peak of orca activity in the surrounding waters. In the months since Olivia's revelation, their relationship had evolved with the deliberate pace of natural growth, unhurried, yet purposeful. Each step forward taken with full awareness, their cottage had become a sanctuary of shared discoveries. Bookshelves lined with marine biology texts stood alongside volumes of poetry and philosophy. Olivia's photographs adorned the walls, not just wildlife images, but increasingly intimate moments captured between them. Ethan's profile as he stood watching the sunset, their intertwined hands against weathered driftwood, the shadow patterns, their bodies made when they danced in the kitchen to old jazz records. The physical aspect of their relationship had unfolded gradually. Each new experience approached with a reverence that transformed what might have been awkwardness into something sacred. Ethan had discovered a profound truth, that there was something extraordinary about being the first to witness Olivia's responses to pleasure, to see emotions cross her face that she had never shown anyone else. "I used to think experience was about quantity," he told her one evening as they lay tangled together, watching stars appear through the skylight above their bed. "Now I understand it's about presence, being fully aware in each moment rather than comparing it to what came before." Olivia traced patterns on his chest, her touch both innocent and knowing. "You've taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness," she murmured. "All those years, I thought protecting myself meant staying apart, but real strength is risking connection even when it terrifies you." Their work at the conservation center had flourished alongside their personal bond. Together they had developed new methods for tracking orca communication patterns, combining Ethan's scientific expertise with Olivia's gift for observing subtle behaviors. Their colleagues often remarked that they functioned like a single organism with complementary parts, their intuitive leaps balanced by his methodical analysis. On the anniversary of their commitment ceremony, they took a small boat out to the lighthouse where they had exchanged vows. The day was perfect, calm seas under a boundless blue sky, with distant orcas breaching on the horizon. "I've been thinking about expectations," Olivia said, as they anchored in a secluded cove. "We create stories about how life should unfold, then feel disappointed when reality doesn't match them." Ethan nodded, helping her onto a sun-warmed rock where they spread a blanket. Scientific method at its core, hypothesis versus observation. Exactly. She unpacked the picnic they'd brought, local cheese, fresh bread, blackberries picked that morning. If I had followed the expected path, rushing into physical relationships before emotional ones were established, I might never have developed the patience to wait for what we have. And if I had continued assuming that accumulated experiences automatically created depth, I might have missed recognizing what was special about you. He poured 2 glasses of wine, handing one to her. "Though I admit, I still feel occasionally intimidated by the responsibility of being your first." Olivia laughed, the full, uninhibited sound that had become more frequent as she'd grown comfortable. "In their shared life, I sometimes worry that I can't compare to others in your past." "That's the beautiful irony, isn't it?" Ethan said, reaching for her hand. "Your inexperience made you more present, more authentic than anyone I've ever known. You never learned to perform intimacy. You only know how to truly feel it." As afternoon melted into evening, they watched a family of orcas swim past their cove, a mother, father, and new calf moving in perfect synchronicity. Olivia photographed them, capturing the moment when the baby breached, seeming to dance in the golden light. "Oh, set," she whispered, reviewing the image. "The perfect metaphor for us." Ethan looked at the photo and understood immediately. The adult orca swam with the confidence of experience, but it was the calf new to the world yet inherently connected to its environment that exhibited the purest joy. "New beginnings informed by ancient wisdom," he said, kissing her temple as they sailed back toward their island home. Olivia wrapped her arms around Ethan from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For understanding that my inexperience wasn't about lack, but about waiting for something worth experiencing fully. For showing me that intimacy isn't just physical, it's about being seen completely. And loved anyway." The lighthouse beams swept across the darkening water, guiding them home, like that steady light. Their connection had become a fixed point around which both their lives now navigated, not through desperate clinging or fear of loss, but through the quiet certainty that some discoveries, when made with full awareness, transform everything that follows.